De mare.
Hello, the beautiful world. How is everybody doing? We are live. I'm so excited. I'm getting into it. I am so excited for today's topic. My name is Malele. You're tuned into Africa Week 2020, and today we're going to be discussing language as a means of power. How language can be used to wield power and influence in society. We will be going into so much more detail and covering a whole lot of topics about how language can be used as a decolonization tool, language, as like the relationship between written language and spoken language, why some languages are more superior than others. Like there's so much that we're going to be uncovering and just basically delayering in this session. I'm really, really excited for the next hour and a half. And then also we're going to be closing off with a lovely performance by the wonderful Tones, who has some very soulful sounds for us. But I'm actually very excited to be joined by the 4 people that I have today on this panel. I feel a little out of my depth here, which is why I'm also so excited, because I'm going to be learning along the way, because in life we teach each other. So my name is Malele. I am your MC. I'm your host. I am the one who's going to be bringing you the sauce, the spice, dabbing a little bit of fire and some flames, and then, discuss. I'm joined today by the scholar, a teacher, Msakha Mona. He is a man I have the pleasure of calling my friend. He's a lecturer. He is a lover of literature. He's a performer. He's a writer, and a general liker of things, which is why we are such good friends. And he's going to be joining us today and sharing a bit of his perspective. I've got the lovely Bule Welsh as well joining us today. He is a linguist. He's a research linguist, which is something I am going to be probing in a minute to find out more about what exactly a linguist is and what y'all do. But he's a comedian, a writer, performer, scholar, all-round entertainer, actually. Let me just put it that way. And so I'm really excited for the droplets of wisdom Bule will be sharing. Of course, the queen, the true embodiment of a queen, Dima Mahmoud is also in the room, in the virtual room today. How are you doing, Dima? She's the founder, actually, of Africa Week 2020, as well as the co-founder of the Nubian Initiative. So really excited to find out, what she's going to be dropping for us today and the wisdom she'll be sharing. And then last, but most certainly not least, and then I am also very excited to hear from, particularly when it comes to Afro-Caribbean languages and African-American Ebonics and the story behind that and the context behind that. The lovely Tristan Samuels with the very stylish hair. I must say, when I see hair like that, a carefully coiffed hair like that, I get very jealous and envious. So I'm actually very excited for today. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So I'm going to start off by warming the room with a bit of a soft one, and just ask you guys to share with the people who are joining us today. And we're being joined all over the world, which is one of the beautiful things about Africa Week and the beautiful things about virtual platforms, right? We get to share our stories and our perspectives and context and teach and learn from each other globally. So I would actually like to know from you guys, what drew you to this topic, and specifically what for you is most powerful about language? Why? What are the aspects for you that stand out as language being a mechanism of wielding power and influence in society? Msakha, would you like to start us off there?
I feel like asking why me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I had a feeling he was going to say that.
but before I get started, let me just greet a bit those who are across the ocean. It's fine. You get it or you don't get it. It's part of the whole experience. So ngithanda kunibingelela ababukeli nebalaleli. Ligama lami ngumsakha. Msakha lwatiwa ngesibongo Mona mashashane lwashaya inyoka wayibeka endleleni osabanye batandlula abayidobho washaya imbuto yabophela emhlangeni bakaphi abathuma amadudane balabanye abathume kudzini
Oh,
ngitawushiya
sure.
lapho umnyalo singene kule nkulumo kule uya-understand. So what I just did, it's a greeting from where I'm from, Mzansi, South Africa, especially in Mpumalanga. Ngingumswati. Swati is one of the Nguni languages in Southern Africa. So hopefully the way I just greeted can also help me to answer some of more question about gahle what's sort of special and exciting about languages. What do languages do? So in our context, let me say as a Nguni person and as an African, I can speak a language, a particular language, and you can, on the basis of that language, get an idea of where I'm from, get an idea of my belief system, get even an idea of what my priorities could be in life just by me greeting or me speaking. And I can share a lot of examples about this. In 2018, I think Pule, when the layover in Dubai. So while you're waiting for the flight there, I met a guy at the coffee shop at the airport. I don't know him. I've never seen him. He's never seen me. But within a few seconds, I was able to tell that this guy is from somewhere in South Africa, not just South Africa, but Gauteng, which is one of the provinces, because of the way he spoke his English and because of the way he walked. Now, according to me, the way you walk is also part of your language. So he has that bumping about his thoughts, which someone in the panel can help me explain later. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's the beauty of language. It's very complicated. It's very sophisticated. It's a sort of a big beast, and you experience and benefit from it part by part or small by small, as we say in South Africa.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think the most powerful thing that caught me there is how you spoke about how language can introduce you and tell your story before you've even told your story. Just by the way that you speak, your inflections, and the way that you articulate it introduces you and sort of already tells your narrative, before you've even told your story. And I think that's actually a very powerful thing about language. So thanks for sharing that.
Cool.
Tristan,
So I'm next. So
yeah.
why me? I guess.
Why me?
Buddy.
I think everybody's gonna be asking me that question throughout the panel.
Wait, but could you? So I just want. Could you? Is the question what got us involved in the study of language?
So what interested you to come through and join the panel? So what about the topic drew you? But
Oh,
more importantly, what is it about language that you see as a power wielding mechanic? So what about language do you find powerful?
okay. So well, I joined this panel because I think it's a critical topic for African people to discuss, especially when we're in a condition where our official languages, languages that we do documentation in, are antithetical to who we are. Because if you understand, language is a fundamental aspect of culture. You can't separate a people from their
Yeah.
culture, and you can't separate them from their language, because that's one of the problems of colonialism and how it reinforces the colonization of the African mind is through language.
Mm,
I'll give a
Mm.
brief example of this. When we talk about, people being bilingual or really sophisticated wielders of language, they're often somebody who can speak multiple European languages, or maybe in some cases, maybe they might throw in Japanese or Chinese, right? Just
mm,
by Mandarin. But you don't really hear people bragging about, well, I speak Yoruba, I speak Tree, I speak Kizulu, I speak Kiswahili, I speak Isen Creole, or some might know as Haitian Creole. That doesn't come off, right? That prestige
mm,
that is. So it's a fundamental important topic. You have to. There's how do you not? But in terms of the power of language, and I guess that kind of gives the segue. I think like with the decolonization, the need for African people to decolonize our mind, language is a fundamental part of it. So kind of reiterating what I said there. So it's like I think I answered both kind of
Yeah.
accidentally.
Yeah.
Accidentally. So the language is
Yeah.
powerful because African people need to know who we are, and languages are clear. So how do you know I'm Jamaican? It's like when Msakha is talking about how he knows how language is clarity of identity. I think for a lot of Jamaican people, especially raised in the diaspora, particularly in the United States diaspora, the England Toronto dynamics a little different, but that language disconnect is a very big issue because like I'm Jamaican, but I don't know how to speak Jamaican, or they might commonly say patois. I reject that term for. We might get into that in the discussion, but
Yes.
that kind of thing. So that lack of cultural clarity comes from distance of language. It's part of it because we see this on the continent as well. I'm sure you all can speak to that. Sometimes, our children only knowing English or French, depending which colonist you're with. So that's how I see it. It's powerful in terms of giving us clarity. And when we have that cultural clarity, we will know how to, solve our problems as African people.
Wow, no, you've said a mouthful, and I wish I'd probably asked you last because you've sort of like got into some topics that I actually want to uncover and like delayer a bit later about decolonizing the mind and how language can be used as a tool of that. So we'll definitely be getting into that. I'm warming up. My queen, Dima, you can unmute yourself there. As I can see, you're like thoroughly into this.
Maskagro, Maskaglo, Maskagni, Maskopi. This is hello, how are you? How do you rise in Nubian, my language? And unfortunately, that's about all I can say in my language. Um, my name is Dima Mahmoud. I am Nubian from Sudan. I grew up in Egypt. Um, what drew me to this panel is what drew me to everything that I am doing is that I have been robbed of my language and hence been robbed of my history and my heritage because they are one and the same. And what is the power of language? It is the kind of power that has two governments actively trying to erase it from a people to stop these people and to stop any future generation from connecting to our roots, from connecting to our history, from understanding where we come from and what we have contributed to that land, what we have contributed to the cradle of civilization, to one of, if not the oldest civilizations in the world. And I say this right now and carry and honor Nubian women who are, as we speak, standing outside the Aswan police station, screaming at the top of their lungs that their children get released, 12 and 13-year-old children, because they were singing in Nubian and peacefully protesting. 12 and 13-year-old children. One of them has a heart disease and they are in prison. And our only crime here, and I say our because we are one people, is that we dare speak our language and want to protect and preserve and promote this heritage through speaking our language, which, by the way, is banned from being taught in schools both in Egypt and Sudan. This is why I'm here, and this is why I do what I do.
Like I get chills actually. I'm actually getting chills as you're talking about it. But there's actually something I actually want to probe that because but I'm gonna give Pule a chance before I forget. But there's actually something I wanted to ask you actually specifically relating to that. But I just want to give Pule a chance to greet the people and to sort of introduce himself as well and warm up the room as well.
Okay, I'll follow Msakha's lead there.
Yes.
Ngizolibingelela ezinjeni yonke yimina uPule kaJalo lisho impokotho ebomvu kaMagayisa waginqa zonke isihlahla wakwaNjana kaMthimkhulu kanotshelwa kaMagabha kaMbange kaMavovo. So in the same way that Msakha was doing, for those who are not familiar with customs in this part of the world, we always call ourselves by the ancestral background and the collective heritage because you are your ancestors, as it were. So you call yourself in that way, and you positioning yourself according to the relations of people who are alive and those who are also not alive. So I think that is one facet of language that is I focus on in my work, which is in phonology as a descriptive linguist, where I'm focusing on the technical side of language, and then I'm also focusing on the politics of language and the philosophy of language as I understand it to be a systems of positionalities. So in this way, we can position ourselves in different ways by what particular nuances of language we are using, and we do this unconsciously. And the job of a linguist is to open the car and check how the car works and explain how it works, uh, uh, rather than just to drive the car, which many people think a linguist is doing, in that they think we're just talking a lot of languages or something. But that's the popular definition of linguist. The linguist is a scientist of language, and we're trying to understand the inner workings of it. But I try to combine the sociolinguistic side with the technical formal linguistic side, rather than keeping in the silos that often happens in linguistics, where people are on one or the other side. So I was invited here by this comrade called Msakha. So that's the reason why I'm here. He deemed it fitting for me to be here. So I'm here at his invitation.
I hope I hope you don't feel that Msakha led you wrong, seeing as he's the man who led you here. I trust you're happy to be with us. So I'm going to go back to Dima, because this is actually something that it's a specific question that I wanted to ask you, because a lot of the work, because you're very passionate about grassroots work. And I mean, of the panels that we've sat on and the work that we've sort of like the times that we've had discussion, you and I, that's like one thing that you and I always sort of like hit the nail on the head on, the macro impact that can be done by just everybody pulling together at a micro level. And so I actually wanted to ask you. I mean, when you're sharing the story, about the 13-year-olds who are imprisoned for just speaking and singing in their language. And it just shows the violence that exists in the world towards indigenous languages, and not just theoretical violence, but physical, like actual violence that exists. But I wanted you to perhaps just elaborate a bit more on on what role, if any, does language have for people at a grassroots level to empower themselves and to sort of to drive the revolution to drive the revolution. And to overthrow, the current status quo. If people are being imprisoned and being punished, so to speak, for revolting for not even revolting, but me speaking my own language is seen as a revolt, So I would just like for you to sort of just give us some perspective and context and elaborate a bit on that, on what people on the streets can actually do to change that status quo.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I was actually just ready to write in the private chat, and I'm glad that you're bouncing this back to me that I can say it. Because in my state of emotions and my being very careful to honor these mothers, I missed a part of something I wanted to respond to Comrade Msakha about him recognizing where that brother was from in the airport based on his walk. And it's why it's called body language. Because even in how we walk and how we talk and how we respond and how we smile and how we frown and how our mothers give us that look that tells us if we don't do what we're being told, we're about to be disappeared off this earth. That's a language. It's all a language. And in how we talk and how we walk and how we be as Nubians, how we are, and I'll speak specifically here because I'm taking it back to that, but this is for everyone. And it's not just for Africans, actually everyone is African ancestry as far as I'm concerned, whether they claim it or not, they will be guided eventually. However, it is in essence our resistance, our form of resistance to say we've been here. Nothing you can do. You getting happy with a pen on a map that maps out this world, and you creating these borders to put us in these little pages, whether it's in a 2D map or in our mental space, caging us into who we are. Our very existence whether it's how we greet each other. Sudanese have a very, very specific way of greeting each other through the arm. It's called the awkward Sudani hug. Yeah, because you don't know if they're coming in for a hug or not. And now with the Islamization and the Arabization of Sudan, you have someone coming at you and you're like, are you gonna hug me? Or if I hug you, are we gonna get flogged? Or what's the situation here? But it's a language. It's a language to say you have touched my heart and I touch yours. I hold your shoulder, I pat you on the shoulder, and then I touch my heart as a form of respect. Yeah, this is all a language. And then you add to it a layer and you just speaking a language that has existed for thousands and thousands of years. You are telling not just the colonizers, because you know what? And I get a lot of backlash for this. The colonizers have left the continent. What we have right now colonizing us on the continent are people who look and speak like us. They are the elephants in the room that we are not even willing to acknowledge and say, listen, the people now oppressing us are our own, are the same people who stood in line and said and claimed that they are here for us and claimed for our independence. And a great example of that is that in the 73 war, when Egypt took the six-day war, the 6th of October war against Israel, it was the Nubian language that was used as a code, as a secret code that Israel could not crack. Israel had cracked the other code. You're going to come and you're going to use our language to win your war, and then you're going to ban it from schools. This is honoring a people that allowed you to get a piece of your land. True, they didn't get the land back because they had the war, but that war shifted the balance of power in the region to their favor, that they can sit comfortably and say, you're going to give this land back. So you got your land back, you ripped us off of our lands, you sent our ancestors away, you drowned our heritage, you displaced more than 135,000 people at least, which, by the way, this is something that I give a shout out to Mazen for making that conversion. Back at the time in the 60s, 135,000 is a huge number. That's equivalent to 2 or 3 million today. To displace that amount, that's genocide. But it's not said as that because it's an African language, and they were Arabs who were doing it. And so somehow it's acceptable. So just getting out and speaking, and by the way, this protest that was happening, this peaceful protest, I should emphasize, this peaceful protest that these kids were part of 2 days ago, this happened 2 or 3 years ago as well, where Nubian youth went out with the drums, singing in Nubian. Because you know what? This in 2012, when the Egyptians went out to protest with Topper Mubarak, they rewrote the constitution, and in this so-called new constitution, they said Nubians will be allowed to return to their land. Are Nubians today allowed to return to their land? No. What is that government doing? It is still carving more of their land and giving it to the military so the military can border Sudan more so that they can carve in and take halayib. And how dare the Nubians go out and sing and say, this is our land. If you study the music of Nubians, it is linked to nostalgia. It is love and love of our land. It is pain from losing blood and pain from losing our land, from being sent away from our water. That's the power of language. This is why it's so critical for us to revitalize it. And it has to start with us as people. Because, and by people, I acknowledge that our parents, and I give thanks to them, because ultimately they want the best for us and they want us to be able to have some form of continuity. And they have been part of the system for long enough to know we will not be welcomed in that system, in that space, in that society, as long as we are speaking our language. So we need to assimilate and we need to take in, because if you speak Nubian before you speak Arabic, your Arabic will always have a Nubian accent, because we have vowels, we have sounds in the language that simply do not exist in Arabic. And so when you read Arabic, when you learn Arabic, you will always have that accent because your tongue can move in ways the Arabs cannot move it. Right? And that's a problem. So I have my first interaction with the language was Professor Herman Bell, who is, I give thanks to him every single day because he is why I am now on my trajectory. A and though I am not someone who will say it, but that he is a white man from Virginia who came to me and spoke my language, and when I couldn't understand, there's this combination of rage and heartbreak in his eyes, saying, "How dare you not speak your language?" This is why it is up to us as this generation of all people of African ancestry, and I say all people of African ancestry, to make sure that the next generation is speaking our language, because that is how we tell ourselves before anyone else. I don't care about the colonizers. I don't care about the system. I don't care what is happening outside our family. This is a family affair. Our family needs to be able to speak our language, and we have many, many languages in this family that we need to
Mhm.
know. We need to teach each other. We need to learn. We need to make sure that the seedlings that are coming out are sprouting in a language we understand, so that they know that this ground, this earth is ours.
Oh. Wow. So, I mean, you bring, I don't know if, I mean, guys, we're here, this is a family meeting. So, if you have anything, like, just chime in. We're like literally, you know, the baby thing and everything. I'm comfortable, I'm warm, I'm having a good time. So, please just like take it over and like chime in, hey? But I think the thing that really caught me was when you're talking about assimilating and having to learn another language because it's now seen as the language of normality. It's a standard language by which, you know, to communicate in, right? And Msakha, I actually wanted to ask you because I think offline we've obviously had chats, but as Dima was speaking, I was actually thinking about you because for those of you guys who don't know, South Africa has got 11 official languages, but I always think of them as 10 because one of the 11 is, Dima's laughing because I've said this many a time, because one of the 11 is English. And I'm always just like, I don't really feel like English is a official, or well, it's official, but I don't feel like it's our language. Afrikaans is our language, you know what I mean? Even though it's got other derivations and so forth, but it's a language indigenous to the people of South Africa. But for those of you who don't know, South Africa's got 11 official languages. And Msakha speaks many of those, right? And you might be thinking, but of course, Msakha would speak many of those. He's a Black South African man. But that's actually not the case. Most, even Black South Africans, speak on average about, let's say, maybe 3. You would speak English because it's the standardized language, and then you speak the language of like your mother tongue or the language of your cultural group or your ethnicity. So you speak Zulu if you're from the Zulu people, or Sotho if you're Sotho, and then maybe one more. But Msakha here speaks, if I'm not mistaken, 10 or 11 out of the 11. So my question to you, Msakha, is how did you assimilate and adopt, rather, these other languages without losing your own? I've always found that very interesting because you're still very proud of your own heritage and your own culture. You speak the language very well and very fluently, but you're also able to communicate and engage in other languages, but you haven't lost your own heritage. You know, so that's always sort of intrigued me. How did you adopt and adapt without losing yourself?
Yo, that's a very expensive question. It's very
Yeah, dude.
yeah, I had to approve.
It would require like a YouTube original documentary or like a Netflix special documentary one.
I've watched it.
I think I'd probably speak about 8.5 South African. Yeah. But I want to answer you by sort of borrowing from some of Dama's experience with language being used to operate, control, and impose hegemony. So I think all of this, for me, in summary, you look at them, maybe humans have a heart issue. You know, we have heart issues that we then make sort of institutional issues. You know, out of a heart issue, you wonder, can you learn from another person without the fear that you will lose who you are? Based on the condition of your heart, the answer will come. I don't know if that makes sense. So if my heart is that mina ngumsaka and I am Mswati, South African, and I'm content there, and I'm enough there, then I'm able to learn from other people, and I'm even able to teach other people. But this is the one part, né? There's the other layer, especially in the South African experience, at least in Msaka's South African experience, where to speak your own language is to fight and to resist. So it's not necessarily a joyous process where you say, I am proud of who I am. I joyfully speak Swahili. I joyfully speak all the languages that are associated with blackness. To dare speak those languages, especially in certain institutions and certain spaces, is actually to resist and to fight. If you recall some of the recent xenophobic attacks, Dima already spoke about what the borders did to our social groupings. Some of the people who would be caught in the crossfire are people like Msakha, when one of the languages I speak is Xitsonga. Now, people who speak Xitsonga or Xichangane, a lot of them are in Mozambique, which is another country in this land of ours, right? But we also have Batsonga or Bachangane here in South Africa. But on the basis of of sounding like someone who is in Mozambique, you would get beaten, you would get ridiculed. And I remember at primary school, and I will say the name of the school because it happened. Mfundo Mtoti, where I went, Gauteng, Eporiki. One of the most painful experiences I've ever witnessed was to hear a school teacher saying to these two kids, "Ningasaphinde nikhulume le nto leyo la, otherwise sizonixosha," because those kids spoke Shangane, Shale Mozambique, which is a song from Mozambique. And I was a child at that time, so obviously I could not do anything. But why I took it personally is because those kids spoke, and I also spoke the language because it's my mother's language, right? So when she said that to them, she was in fact saying it to them. So already that teacher had a heart issue around value as expressed in language. So someone speaks a certain language was considered of a lesser value. Someone who spoke a language that would be considered more socially or institutionally acceptable. I don't think anyone would have a problem if those kids spoke English or spoke one of the that are more acceptable in the Gauteng setting. So to summarize my answer to the question more, I think it came from a place of yes, appreciating who I am, but also a place of not wanting to give joy to the system that seeks to oppress me. And I knew that one of the ways through which colonialism thrives is if languages, our indigenous languages, are cut. So colonialism has no interest in developing your language. It only has an interest to take away completely your language. Because if you dare take away a person's language, you actually have taken, look, so a language is not just something that we do, we speak, it's actually part of who we are as a species, right? Not even as a people who that group, but as a species. So the moment you are taking away my language, you're actually taking away part of my ability to exist as a species, right? So there in my language lies my epistemic being. So certain ways of knowing, I can only express them through my language. So there's certain things that I know in my socio-cultural background that I can only experience and transmit through a certain language. So for me to be able to continue to do that with fellow human beings, I needed to know, to be confident in my own language, but also to learn the languages of the other. And the amazing thing there that will keep you going if you are keen on learning language is how the more languages you speak and the deeper you go into learning languages, the more you realize our togetherness, even spiritually so, the more you realize, man, something, how come I've never been in Kenya, I'm South African, but I can hear when someone who's from Kenya speak, I can pick up something in their tongue and I can feel close to them. How does it work? And that thing is not academic. It's not Western scientific. It's just one of those God's gift to us that we can use to connect. So if you tamper with that, you've managed to actually destroy a human. I think let me leave it there.
Ooh. Does anybody have anything else to add, Pule? To like, guys keep going. Wow, I'm like, wow, like that last bits that you just shared, that like
That was
to temper with a person's language is to temper with their humanity. Wow. I'm sorry, Pule, you had something you wanted to share.
Well, I wanted to just, I mean, yes, I'm in agreement. And I just wanted to go back to what you were saying and what Msakha was saying about the South African context, linguistic context, where we have these 11 official languages. And the world assumes that because we have so many official languages, this is some sort of a progressive thing. Like, this is so diverse. Wow, this is amazing diversity. Wow, these guys are really progressive. But in actual fact, our language policy is very, very backward. The reason is that all our official languages are just indirectly the legacy of the apartheid system, which was called the homeland or Bantustan system, where people were put into very small pieces of land, and there was a certain authorized and sanctioned ethnicity that was there, and people were removed forcefully from different places to those places, and there was a certain culture, language in an ethno-nationalist sense that was associated with those things. And there were language boards that were set up by the apartheid state. And all that has happened in this so-called New South Africa is that we have just taken the apartheid system wholesale and we've made it official in terms of language policy. Whereas they weren't not languages of the state, now they're languages of the state, but in the same boundaries. So in the same way that the late Binyavanga Wainaina said once, we are killing each other in the same boundary that Muzungu made, you see. So because we are killing the same boundary that the Lekhoa or the Mlungu made, you understand? We are killing, in other words, we are creating the same divisions and perpetuating the same divisions. And in South African context, we call this tribalism. But really, it's a type of, it's colonial racism that we are perpetuating. It touches on what Dima was saying as well. And if we were to enumerate languages in the same way that we distinguish Siswati and isiZulu, for example, we will enumerate 35 languages, 40 languages in South Africa. You know, you can go up and up and up, you see. And speaking that language is, as people are saying, say if I say ngitokhuluma ngeSphuti, Sputi lesihle, Sputi lekhetfu, ngitokhuluma ngelilimi lekhetfu. If I talk that language, which is very old and supremely marginalized, and most South Africans are not aware that there's something like that at all, but it's an independent kingdom of its own. And no one is aware of that. Usually those people get classed as Basotho or Amaxhosa. So in that way, it is taking away something of their themness, or ubuyena, as we would say, their themness, or ubumina, the meanness of the thing. And I think that is a key, as Msakha ends very powerfully. It is a key function of the colonial system of race as well, because as I understand from critical race theory, especially in the works of Afro-pessimists, race is an antagonism between what is set up as human and what is set up as non-human. So it is about fundamentally dehumanizing, and that dehumanization happens through language as well. And I think that is a very key point that Msakha raised.
Wow. Yo, no, we're warming up. We're heating up. We're heating up. I'm loving this. You know, it's actually very funny that you say that, because I think I was on another panel with BMT and Dima as well, and I was saying to them that because when you're talking about the apartheid system and how our language, and Nazi is actually sharing that now, that the language policies perpetuate the apartheid system, I was actually saying to them that you could understand a group of people. You could understand a history of a people just by following the history of their language. Like you could, you just explained apartheid to people who maybe don't even know what it was, just by explaining to them how we even got to having 11 official languages. You know what I mean? And for me, that I've always found that so exceptionally profound, especially with the importance of, understanding your history and understanding your heritage and understanding how you got to be where you are in the way that you are. You know what I mean? And I've always thought that language has a profound power, actually, of explaining a people's history without, going into all the other stuff, but explaining how people got to where they are. But it actually, I actually want to go over to Tristan because you've been a bit quiet, and I've actually been itching because when I was looking at your bio and everything, I've been actually been itching to ask you about Afro-Caribbean languages and American Ebonics. If you could maybe just let us, for some of us who are not as educated and a little ignorant, if you could, just elaborate on what are Afro-Caribbean languages and American Ebonics, and just tell us a bit more about that
All
and
right, all
the
right.
work that you do in that space.
Oh, wait. Okay, yeah. So I'm off mute. Okay, I didn't want to start talking.
Yeah.
Thank you. So no, I was just really I was quiet because I like to listen a lot. Dima knows that. Because no, it's new to me as well. I'm very ignorant about the language situation in y'all's respective regions, so or countries, I should say. So I was paying a lot of attention, and I saw a lot of interconnections, but hopefully I get back to that because I want to hold on that point of interconnection. I'm going to try to circle back around, make sure I circle back around to it. But
I'm making a note, interconnection.
about Afro-Caribbean languages is basically the language that people of the Caribbean speak, and Ebonics of African people in the United States speak. The critical issues, because you notice I said languages, usually you would hear, if you were to read a general text, you would hear Creoles. I do not use Creole. I do not use Patois. And in the case of Ebonics, you won't hear me say like, I think the term is African American Vernacular English now. I think that's what it is. I do not use those terms. And part of why that is, and this goes to something to interconnection, what Msakha was talking about when he goes to Kenya and he can tell, he can still kind of be in tune with the people, that intuition that, a materialist, Eurocentric perspective wouldn't capture. I hope I'm representing what he was saying right in that context, because that stuck out to me because I observed this as well. Even when talking with my kinfolk in the continent, I noticed certain things just being from the Caribbean. But now with Afro-Caribbean languages, why I say that they're not Creoles, and this is my view, it's not everyone's view. I treat them as languages. I see them as African languages, because when you look at the cultural disposition of the languages, it's the same thing. What you have is you have a contact situation. So you have contact languages. They're languages that emerge when you have two radically different cultures coming into contact. So in the Caribbean and with African people in the United States, you have the plantation context, right? And colonialism. And out of this is you have the African linguistic responses to that situation. I hope I'm making sense so far. So these languages are, and now some people would argue, well, you can't call them African because Africa's diverse and blah. Yeah, Africa's diverse. And you know what? There's even more diversity when you go into its diaspora. I'm very frank with that. I mean, because I think those are very silly arguments. Because what it is, and I think sometimes we take this kind of for granted, is that in the diaspora, what you have is you have Pan-African ethnicities. Because if you go to Jamaica, for example, you have a Country, you have Ewe, you have Igbo, you have Yoruba. You had different groups. I'm just for example, you have different groups of Africans that were blended into one. So the Jamaican national motto, which again is a relic of ongoing colonialism, one out of many people, should really be one African people out of many. That's really more accurate, because especially when you look at Jamaica, you look at Haiti, even it's very clear, right? Even when I talk to my continental kinfolk who've ever had a chance to go to Jamaica or go to Haiti, they often feel at home. Well, why is that? Because the people who create that environment. So what you have now, going back to the contact situation, some of the words, now I'm not denying that you have English words in the language, but when we think of what a language is, it's really the grammar that's supposed to really define a language, not words. Because here's the thing, if we use that logic and apply it to, say, the most hegemonic language in the world, English technically would be a Creole of 20 languages. If you look at the borrowings English has from Latin, ancient Greek, some extent Arabic, Spanish, French, it would be a Creole by that respect, maybe even a pidgin. But no one's going to do that with English. And I think we know why that is, right? That, that white supremacist.
Why is that?
That's the
I'm a
system.
poke at it. I'm a poke at it.
Right.
Why is that?
That's the system
For
of
those for those who aren't sure, for those who are wondering, why is that?
it's systematic. It's systematic, and that's the thing about colonialism is that even though we do have, in African majority countries, we have, formal independence, or some might say flag independence. The second part has to be the cultural aspect. So even the very structures and institutions, they're antithetical to the African culture, right, to the indigenous African
Mm.
culture. So, for example, in Barbados, recently they just got rid of the Queen Elizabeth, who I refer to really as a welfare queen, if we're really keeping it honest, really honest, if we really think about it, right, of England. They recently released her as a head of state, right, which should have been done a long time ago. But that's, again, a process of decolonization. And part of it is that cultural thing. Even when we talk about things like parliaments, democracies, these are all very Eurocentric ideas. How do African people organize a society? So, and again, language, I see language within that larger context. So now going back to the Caribbean, I know I've been jumping all over the place, but going
Yeah,
back
no,
to
go ahead. Go
Caribbean
ahead.
and and African populations in the United States, as I was saying, if you look at the grammar of the languages, it's very consistent with their African context. So, for example, one of my friends, and this is one of the things that I think is really important with language, is that for African people, when we're learning each other's languages, you really realize how connected we are, because in the diaspora, African people, because of the Eurocentric system, a very thoroughly backed system. I think sometimes we underestimate that, how deep that system is reinforced on a social, political, and economic level. We tend to not want to see ourselves as African. So you'll see a person with a hairstyle like mine, I'm I ain't African, or I'm something. They'll talk about they're mixed with some non-African group that doesn't even make sense, right? You'll see that as a general theme, but that's because of a very violent, hostile systems of indoctrination under white supremacy, the system of white supremacy. So that's what happens. But when you look at the languages, it's very clear that we're an African people. So, for example, I have a friend who's Igbo, and I asked her a question, because this is what I usually do whenever, because I grew up, when I was learning about myself, I learned to understand myself, yes, as a Jamaican, but I'm also African, right? So to me, Jamaican is African. It's just another African ethnic group. That's how I understand it fundamentally. And I think any other understanding is false. I don't see myself as a hybrid identity or any of that stuff. I've never believed that, because I look at it as, hey, who else has locks, right? African people. It's just very simple, right? I'm very. It might seem reductionist, but it's 1 + 1 is 2. It's not hard, right?
Mm.
So going
Yeah.
into language, I have a friend who's Igbo, and one time we're having a conversation, and I asked her, because this is when I started to get into my research a bit more, because I always, value my own language informally, but it's only when I got into Africology here at Temple. And for those who don't know what Africology is, it's basically Afrocentric studies. So an Afrocentric approach to African reality, basically across space and time. I'm giving a very concise definition, but I don't want to override, but I hope we're clear about that. So at the Africology department, one of my professors wrote a paper, Kimani Nehusi, from Medu-Neter to Ebonics. Medu-Neter referring to the ancient language of the people of Kemet, who we know in Eurocentric terms, ancient Egypt. And when I read that paper, and he was making these connections between Medu-Neter, West African languages, and Afro-Caribbean language. And I tell him all the time, he probably gets tired of me telling him, it just blew my mind. Because even though I'm speaking the language, I couldn't make the connection of how deeply related it was to that ancient context. The West African context I knew, but the ancient one, and that's what my research is about now, it's just like, wow. And I would see things before, but no one ever put it in a package for me that I could really say, oh my God. And then once he told me that, I started seeing things all over the place. So there's that. But now going back to my conversation with my Igbo friend, one of the things I was asking her if I could say, because in African languages, primarily you don't have a verb to be. So in English, you say, I'm good, right? I am good, right? In Ebonics context, or even a Jamaican context, and I'm sure probably in the Haitian context, you could say something like, you good? And that could be a statement or a question, because again, remember, there's no verb to be, but it's in the intonation that you can tell whether I'm making a statement, you good, or you good, like a question. That can sometimes be negative in a hostile situation, like, you good, bro? Like, right. Right, but that intonation, right? You see that in Medu Neter as well. But I was asking her something along the lines, what if I wanted to say shipritty or impritty, right? Because in Jamaican, im can refer to a man or woman, though sometimes we use she, but im, depending who you're talking to, can refer to a man or a woman. So if I say im just have baby, you know I'm talking about a woman, right? So I asked her something to that effect, like if I could say im pretty, right, or she pretty, and she said, yeah, you would say omar ma. And I said, so you guys don't have a verb to be in your language? And she was like, no, I think it's there. Then she thought again, and she was like, you know what's funny? I would have never thought about that grammar point you made until you asked me that question. Like, you really feel the connection, and it's just a simple conversation. I didn't get into like my research. I just asked a very basic question, and this gets into the essence of my argument. I think for African languages to be advanced, there has to be more, or there has to be more, because they've been talking about, we've talked about in academic literature the African quote unquote influences on Afro-Caribbean languages. But I'm saying, I want to take it a step further. I'm saying, no, to understand any African language on the continent outside of its local specific context, it should be interpreted from the languages of the people of the African diaspora, because it's only in those languages that the grammar continues and the cultural disposition continues, if that makes sense. So, for example, Omar Ma, in English, I'd have to say she or he is pretty. In Jamaican, I can just say im pretty, right? That's a very fundamentally different construction. Are you following what I'm saying? I hope I'm not
Mm.
anyone.
Yeah.
You miss that, right, if you're translating in English, French, and German. And that's not to diss those languages, it's just they're not compatible. For example, if I was studying ancient Greek from a, because I've also studied that as well. I did 3 years of that. Um, if I was trying to do that from a Jamaican perspective, it would be very hard, because ancient Greek has tenses like past, present, future. And then I know there's different divisions of the tenses within that. I'm just, trying to be concise. Jamaican doesn't work that way. African American Bardics doesn't work that way, right? It's an aspect-based system. So aspect, for those who might not be familiar with the term, grammatical aspect, when we're talking about how verbs are used, it refers to the nature of how an action occurs. So, for example, I want to use an example from Swahili. If I say, what's the word to speak? Man, I was just talking about this. The way that in Swahili, if you want to say, speak, thank you. So, wana sema, dematak. You see, the talk, right? In Jamaican, is a preposition. There's other uses of ya, but the form I'm talking about is a preposition. Dematak. In Swahili, it's wa na sema. The na is functioning like the in Jamaican, because it's a kind of preposition used to mark when someone is speaking. But in English, you'd have to say they are or were speaking. In Jamaican, we just use the preposition if we want to indicate what's going on in the moment. And that can refer to any moment in time. I can say, them a talk nice to me yesterday, them a talk nice to me today, right? It's the same thing. So that aspect form of communication, you probably, and I'm sure it's probably hitting something to some of those speak continental languages. You probably never thought of it before, but you're probably thinking, wait, I recognize it sounds familiar. But again, if we just focus on, oh, well, these have English roots, we'd miss the African creativity and ingenuity of those languages and the Africanity of those people. Because to Msaka's point earlier about how colonialism creates dehumanization, I wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit and say, like, what the Arab and European domination combined into what you might call Eurasianism does the main objective of it is to suppress the African in us. It's to suppress our Africanity, to make us, make us think we have to wear hair that looks like them, not like ourselves, to make us talk like them, dress like them. We could go down the list. And then, but in the case of language, that their way of talking is good, our way of talking is not intellectual, until you want to make fancy billboards, right? You want to make billboard signs. This happens a lot with Jamaica, right? No one goes to Jamaica to expect to hear English, right? But, but yet in the politics of the country, because of European thinking, Eurocentric colonization, it's, there's a big resistance from certain sectors of the society to making the language official. It's an ongoing battle right now in Jamaica right now to make the Jamaican language official, the language that majority of the population speaks, right? And they
So
get
it's not
into,
official.
no, it's
To
not.
be clear, it's not official.
No. But you go there and that's what you but no, things are
That's what you expect to hear.
This is what I mean about with decolonization. If you don't get rid of Eurocentric structures, it just creates a European, or in some cases, those who are victims of Arab colonization, it creates an Arab inside the African mind, or in some cases, a European inside the African mind, depending which colonizer you're dealing with. And that's the effect that it's created. So even when it comes to seeing our own culture, we're hostile to those things. So like for some Jamaican people, they'll say, for those who are advocating for the language, some of the resistance is, why spend time learning Jamaica? Why not learn German? And this is where I get into, us seeing ourselves as African. Why would you suggest German? Why not suggest Yoruba? Why was that person's suggestion German, right? That you can barely, because I've tried German, right? And there was something I think Dima mentioned and Msakha mentioned about even when we're speaking here, and I was listening very attentively. I remember taking a German class. I remember because for one of my degrees, I wanted to learn German to learn how to read certain texts, to be able to read certain texts. And, my instructor, she wasn't racist. I think she was just very honest. My pronunciation just wasn't there for German. And I don't think it was racist. Just, to be honest, I came to the conclusion with German, I was just too African for the German pronunciation. And I stand by that. And some people would think it's reduction. People will think it's reductionist, but because that's what it is. We have a proverb in Jamaica, one of my favorites. Puss and dog na have the same luck. I am not a dog, so I cannot meow like a cat, right? But if I'm a dog, I can't meow like a cat. If I'm a cat, I can't bark like a dog. You understand? And I think that's very relevant, right? Because language is an expression and an outward reflection of our ontology. Right. So that's precisely why. But now, if I try to learn Twi or Swahili, my pronunciation is going to be stronger, right? Because some of the sounds are there, right? Like the NY sound in Swahili is there because in Jamaica we have it too. Like, nyam a little something. Nyam is our word to eat, right? That's an NY sound, right? That you ask a person who's an English speaker to say that, it's totally different. So no, I just think so. I'm a big advocate to kind of come around to it, is that I really think more work needs to be done on both sides of the diaspora and learning each other's languages and doing scholarship in said languages and drawing those connections in our scholarship. So, like how English writers will quote French randomly in a paper, to look really like sophisticated, even though it doesn't make sense. Like, it used to irritate me even outside of my politics when, you're reading and someone just writes raison d'etre randomly in a paper. I'm like, because I know what it actually means. I'm like, that didn't really make functional sense. Because no, I'm familiar enough with French, but I'm like, this is silly, right? Right. I'd much rather quote a proverb in one of the African languages of the continent and the diaspora to signify my sense. You understand what I mean? So I'd much rather quote a Kizulu proverb. I don't know when to quote, but I'm sure y'all will share some with me, right? That would be much more powerful, right? So that's sort of my perspective on languages. It really clarifies us on who we are on an individual context in our specific groups. But when we are able to draw those connections to other groups of African people, it really clarifies our unity, culturally speaking, as African people. And from that point, I think our relations that we have between each other will improve especially in our battle against this very anti-African attack.
Wow. Damn, man, Tristan, you gave us a whole lot. You got something you want to say? Or you just saying hi or something? I don't know if you
No,
I'm
no,
muting
I
yourself.
just wanted to pick up. I'm just looking for ways to put a linguistic point as well. And I just wanted to pick up on that nice example of the word nyam. Because, yeah, in the Caribbean, that's used for eat. But even here in South Africa, we can use that colloquially to mean eat. But it also means meat, inyama, or nama. And in other places, it means an animal. And the original meaning is an animal. And a king in our part of the world is called ingonyama or ingwenyama, which is a cat and a big cat animal. That's the way of understanding a royal, is ingwenyama. So we see with this etymology of the word nyam, that's a very powerful diaspora term. That is travel everywhere. That travel everywhere in the diaspora. And when we say that, we mean of all time and place. You understand? We're talking going back centuries before colonialism as well. So that is a good example of that word with the etymology. It's nice to check etymologies sometimes because you find connections that you didn't necessarily know were there. And there's so many connections in diasporic languages, African diasporic languages, in two languages that we are very familiar with. It is a very good way as Pan-Africanists that we can connect African cultures around the world together. Or remember, Pan-Africanism being the idea that Africa is a global thing. It's not something to do with the continent or some ideas of continents or states or those kind of things. So I think there's a way that language itself, and specifically focusing on the technicalities of language, is a good way of doing that kind of politics. So it's a very powerful way of doing that. For example, with that example of the word nyam. I'll leave it there so as not to take time, but I have more things to say.
Come on, bring it on, Pule, bring it on. Like we're being schooled here and we're enjoying. I mean, I can't think of any reason why we wouldn't want more.
Let me do one more little one then. Another thing picking up on Tristan was saying, I'd just like to introduce the topic of writing. And I'd like to just share a screen here. This is from a talk that I usually do about African writing systems. So
yes,
here we
I like this. I like this.
Yeah, so here we heard him speaking about Medu nature. And one thing that we sometimes forget is the Medu nature itself is the origin of the Latin alphabet that we're using today. And sometimes I like to state this in political terms by saying that the origin of Western culture to a large degree is in Kemet and Nubit of ancient times. And here we see the characters of what is called in Western scholarship hieroglyphics, which is Medu nature, which is just a direct translation. It means sacred writing, right? Here we have the writings here. These are letters at the top, and then we have it in the Phoenician script.
Are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, I'm sharing a screen.
No, you're not. I have to. It has to pop up on my side for me to allow, but nothing has come through. If you click on share the screen and be specific with the application that you are choosing to share, if it's a PowerPoint or a page. There we are. Yes. Here we are.
So here we see at the top the Medu nature. That Tristan will be very familiar with this kind of a sequence, of course. Here's the Medu nature, the symbols at the top. And then here we have the second line is the Phoenician symbols, then the ancient Greek symbols, and then the Etruscan or old Italic symbols, the Italic Peninsula symbols, then the Latin alphabet. And then at the end, I've added what is essentially just a cipher or a code for these symbols, and that is the Wakandan alphabet. So Wakandan alphabet, of course, is people making up a science fiction idea and basing it on certain African writing systems. And for example, the writing system that my name is written on is Nko writing system from West Africa, which is written right to left, which was either invented or repopularized by Solomon Akante from Guinea-Conakry. And this is the most successful indigenous African writing system of modern times. And it's well known in West Africa, and it's very well provided for in all types of technological realms. I send WhatsApp to this and my friends in Mali. We speak together in this writing system, and it is very strong in this very important point that it has obligatory use of tone. So we know that African languages are tonal languages, meaning that the tone by which you speak, in other words, high or low tone or different other tones, are very high or rising, falling. It gives different meanings, just like Chinese languages, for example. And so tone is obligatorily marked in the system. So if you see my name, let me stop sharing there. Is it stop sharing?
Yes, it has.
So if you see my name there, you see Pule, and there's a high tone in the diacritic on the second letter there. It's right to left, okay? And that's Pule. So it's showing that there's a high tone, Pule. So it's telling you how to pronounce that thing to get the correct meaning. So these are technicalities of writing that is also about re-centralizing the African language and African cultural voice as the basis from which we expand in the world. Not as a subject of study, but a methodology of study, a basis of study. Let me leave it there because that's a lot. I'm saying a lot.
Wow. No, I actually have a question for you. I don't know if anybody wanted to add anything on that, but I actually want to ask. I actually have a question for you that that it's actually something that I've been thinking about since you agreed to join the panel. And I mean, we're talking about power, and the power of language and privilege as well. And you being, a white man, you've got white privilege, you've got male privilege, you've got white male privilege, so to speak. But here you are learning the languages, like African languages, more so than I even know, and more so than I can even imagine, like the vast majority of the people who are tuning in today. Like, we've learned so much just listening to you share on the history of African writing systems, even for just like the 5 minutes you did. So my question to you is, why bother? I mean, you already have, like, you are already, in a position of power, in a position of privilege. Why bother, learning languages that are not seen as languages of power, of success, of academia, of influence and power, and intellectual status and so forth? What drew you into that space?
Okay, let me just do a small side note. Look at Dima; she's added a different script there.
To be fair, it's because it's a circus here. You have to understand, with Africa Week 2020, and in some cases we have overlaps. So I actually have my laptop here, and most of the streaming has been done out of my laptop. And so on my laptop for StreamYard, I've had this all along. But because now my laptop has felt like tech gremlins are coming in and taking energy, I wanted to make sure we don't have any of that with this panel. And on this one, I didn't have that. Now, here is something that is very interesting, is that when it's on my laptop, I actually see the characters in my name in Nubin, just in rectangles. I don't see that. But now on my sister's fancy desktop, I'm seeing the characters and I'm jealous. But I also wanted to share what it looks like. That was the intention all along. But yes, I got a little bit jealous when I saw it. I was like, why isn't this there? All this time I've been fidgeting here. I've been trying to put the name on.
Okay. Mission accomplished.
I told you the tech gremlins shall not win. And just for good
Not today, Satan. Not today, Satan. Yeah. Yes, Pule.
I guess I'm going to answer your question, and I'll use that nice metaphor of the blocks there, where the system doesn't have the software to read the African script. It's reading it as blocks. So in my opinion, Mo, that's what you've done to me. You've looked at me
I've read you as
and
a block.
decided that I'm a block.
Yes.
And you've decided you've not seen the African script behind it. And
yes,
this is a complicated issue in South Africa because of our systems. But especially even in the Americas, it's more complicated and more violent, actually. And this is a system in a system, as Ngui Wathiongo would say, in a system of aggression and oppression. Languages and cultures are centers of hierarchy. And myself, I come from a background, as I've explained at the beginning, of indigenous culture. As in, I come from a background where I'm a member of a clan of Bagwamkhize, which is Bagwambanga Mavov, Mbokote Bovgama Kaisa Wakinga Zonke Izihlahla, those are the Tabazek. So in indigenous terms, not in the terms of the state or in terms of the colonial system, if I interpret myself in indigenous terms, I am a subject of an indigenous African nation, which is the Abambo nation, Abasembo, right? And I have to interpret myself in those terms as a Pan-African. Now, if I go to somewhere else in the world, no, people won't know that. They could look at me and racialize me in the way that you've done. It's about context. Racialization is a contextual thing. And as an
Correct.
African, my job is now to push forward Afrocentricity, to say, I must interpret myself in African terms. I must centralize African terms. I must not take colonial terms and European terms to understand my identity. I must understand my identity in Afrocentric terms. So, in the same way that the blocks show, you have to see beyond the blocks and download the softwares to understand upule knowledge as muntu asem. You understand? So I wouldn't identify like that, and I would hope
Yes.
you can see through the blocks and
Amen.
understand.
Yeah.
I don't identify like that, and I don't have to. And it's a challenge
Yes.
to the system because
Yes.
there's a
Yeah.
substance that happens. Thank you very much.
Sure. I fully agree with you, and that's kind of what I actually wanted to get into. I don't know if anybody wants to unmute and share, but that's kind of what I wanted to get into.
I did have a-
I'm sorry, you can go. You don't have to put your hand up.
Oh,
I
I had
feel
a
so
couple-
self-conscious. I feel so self-conscious when you put your hand up because I feel like I must give people permission to speak.
As people as statistics,
Let's not harp too much on a personal identity thing because it can always derail the discussion, and we've got so many important things to say. So, but it can do that. So I'm just putting a thing, and Msakha will protect that.
I do want to add a quick thing, just really quickly. Just as someone who studies Afrocentricity, my advisors, my mentors are Malefe Kete Asante and Ama Mazama at Temple in the Africology department. One of the things I would say is one thing about Afrocentricity that is important. It's not so much that everybody needs to be Afrocentric. You know what I mean, if you follow me, right? But it's really African people need to be Afrocentric, right? And why I say this is because and I think Ancestor Aimé Césaire put this really well, is what colonialism does. It takes away, cultural diversity. I'm paraphrasing him loosely, but colonialism renders the world into a monologue. If you follow what I'm saying, right? So everyone must be forced into Eurocentricity. There's no problem with, a European person doing European things or an Asian doing Asian things. The problem is what we have is when we have African people valuing someone else's language over their own. So Afrocentricity is about how we look at ourselves as African people, more so, not so much another person. I mean, we can get into anti-racism. That's a bit of a different conversation. But as far as Afrocentricity is concerned, it's how we as African people look at ourselves in our own as agents, right? We have to have agency in the way we understand ourselves, and not agency in a liberal everybody do what you want, but agency in the sense that we have a cultural historical awareness that shapes our political consciousness and how we view ourselves and how we move about the world, right? So this is why, for example, so I'm not wearing, I don't wear suits anymore when I go to conferences. That's part of my de-whitenizing, right? I stopped wearing suits at conferences and, re-Africanizing my wardrobe. I don't expect, a European person or an Asian person to do that. It would be, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't impose. We don't impose. Eurocentricity is imposing. So what's going on in South Africa, like, the British did to African people in Jamaica, right? It's imposing European stuff on people who aren't European. So I hope that's really clear in terms of Afrocentricity. It's African people, how we view ourselves, ultimately our sense of consciousness about ourselves as African people.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify that.
Yeah. Msakha, you before I forget, you had to put your hand up.
Am I? Yeah,
Yes.
I think part of the problem, and I will blame it on colonialism, is because when a system is determined enough to stay in place, it leaves a legacy such that those who are oppressed by the system actually end up working for the system to perpetuate the very same system, right? So it is by systemic design that certain languages are sort of um, what's the word, subscribed towards certain identities. So if you speak like this, you must be from there. And I mean, we have it. The example I opened with is already that if you speak a certain way, you must be from a certain part of the world. There's nothing wrong with that. But with colonialism, we're set up to use that as a way of, what's the opposite of appreciation, Gonje? As a way to misrecognize the other, right? So there's a certain division. If you speak the languages on this hand, you must be smart, you must be progressive, all of the things, you must be intellectual. If you speak these other languages, you must be the opposite of this. For example, you would know that with academia, the advent of West academia in Africa, the languages that are attached to academia are actually 5 languages, that were spoken by 5 white men of 5 European countries. You'd count English, French, German, Italian, and what's the other one?
Spanish.
Spanish. Right. So someone had mentioned earlier, I think it's Tristan, how an English poet will just throw in a bit of French just to make things sound a bit sophisticated. But they might not even sense in what the speaker is saying. But because to that language, there is a superiority that comes with the sound of that language. You sort of perceive that person to be smart. So I'm in a sense sort of driving the conversation to see how also power can be perpetuated by ourselves. Not even the colon. We are so, it's sort of like we are cornered, because how do we then converse? There's always the question of how else do we find each other? But at the same time, Tiongo raises this question, Wuti, to speak a language is to take up a position in the world. So the question becomes, which position are you taking? Which position am I as Msakha taking? Because to speak a language is to take up a position. And if you want to complicate it further, to speak a particular language, take up a particular position in terms of religion, in terms of sex, or in terms of gender. You'd notice that in some of our languages, there is no he or she. Umuntu is u. Yeah. How Tristan was saying, what was the word for you, pretty? Umama.
Oh, as Uma.
Pretty.
It's the O. The O was the pronoun. It was the pronoun.
So in my language, we'll say umuhle. So there's no room to attach gender, for example, to that. You're referring to a human being. So by choosing a particular language, I've also chosen a particular position. Had I said the same thing in English, she is beautiful. So now there is a box. Does it make sense? So now there is a box that comes out of that language. So what that does, hey, George English, what that does is that whenever we choose in English, we're actually programming ourselves in a particular, to take a particular position in the world. So I can program myself to speak as a particular intellectual, a lecturer, a son, or a musician, an entertainer, based on the language that I choose to speak in, and also that I choose to think in. There's certain things you cannot think in some languages, but there's certain things that you can think in languages. That makes sense. So in other languages, for example, you refer to God as Ngulunkulu or Umvelengani, or there's a lot of dynamics in terms of what God means to us indigenous people. But in other languages, especially Eurocentric European languages, God has to assume a gender. Yeah, but does it make sense? But in my
Makes sense.
and that's it. That's end of story. So my in summary, I'm saying that if to speak a language is to assume a position in the world, we then have a duty to be cognizant of what position are you assuming for yourself, or what position are you also putting other people that you're addressing in the manner in which you speak or in the language that you choose for them or for you while addressing them? Amen.
Damn. Like I'm gonna have to watch this again after this. Like, cause like the truth bombs and like the wisdom being dropped here is actually quite intense. But then Msakha, my question then
The word
also, Dima?
Sudani in the US here. Refrain from using the B word. Not that you're speaking to a Sudani, a Muslim, and for other intents and purposes, my last name is Arab, so a Sudani, Muslim, Arab in the United States of America. Stop saying the B word, because then I'll disappear, and then you have people coming taking me. Nah.
Yeah. Hey, the power. That's true. Now I've lost my train of thought, Diva. You see what you do to me? I've lost my train of thought now.
Something for a while now, and all of this is going back in circles to the one thing that is central to this to Africa Week 2020, is that at the beginning of all that happened, from when the first ancestor was robbed, was uprooted off of our soil to be crossed over and taken to build the rest of the world, it started by the biggest lie, in that now that you are uprooted, you no longer have a connection to this soil, you no longer have a connection to these people, you no longer have a truth to go back to. And as they did that, and as the more of our ancestors they took, this perpetuated lie continued to grow into a conditioning that is only carried on by the misleaders that we have on the continent and for our people in the diaspora, who are feeding into that lie, into a self-inflicted state of mental slavery that tells us that we are not connected. When the truth is, this is why the certain languages that are in South Africa that are also spoken in Mozambique do not allow this connection, because if we fluidly know that our language carries on, it means, it specifically means that this sound that is coming from our heart, from our souls, through our throats, out of our mouths, is, as they float through the air, are erasing the borders that they drew. That is at the heart of this language and its power, because the more we connect these dots, the more we realize why this language is the way it is. And this is something one of my uncles, one of the elders in the village, I went to my village for the first time in my life in January. That's when I had decided, in the beginning of 2019, I decided that my last full-time year in the United States was going to be 2019. And in December, I packed my things and I left. January, I made my way to my village, and it was the first time in my life. It was also my first return to Sudan in 28 years. And I honor and I thank the martyrs and the sacrifice of the martyrs, because that is the only thing that allowed me to go. However, what my uncle was saying, that when he was trying to explain the language to me, because I'm there to learn my language, he said, you have to take away the structure of language as you know it, as you have learned it. We are a basic people, the Nubian language, and he called it the sand language. It's like Lugha Turabiya, because we drew our language on the sand, and when we didn't like what it looked like, or it didn't feel like it's what the voice is coming out of us, we wipe it and we do it again. It's a sand language. So it's basic. We don't have times to add be or am or are. She beautiful. But the thing is, not even she beautiful, because we don't have he or she. And if they try to Arabize it, you will find these mixtures in the translation of the language. If you're trying to translate a song, it might not always make sense, because we don't have gender. So much so, also, some will say there is thank you in the Nubian language. We don't actually have thank you, because thank you, we thank through our work. We thank through being. We thank through giving. And understanding that means understanding the very psyche of the society and how we function. Understanding the grammar of the Nubian language means understanding that as a society, we are a matriarchal society because everything revolves around the woman. The way you say uncle is mother's brother. The way you say brother is mother's son. The way you say I can't remember now what else, because these are little things that I'm still learning. As I said, I am learning, but they are all connected. And I'm sure it is the same thing. If we go into each of the language, it will draw us back to the woman, because it will draw us back to the womb, because this is what Mama Africa is. And that is what they did. And I go back to when they uprooted the first ancestor. This isn't a racist war. This isn't about racism as in it's just against black people. This was a deliberate attack against the black woman that is Mama Africa. It was uprooting the children and taking the children out of Mama Africa's hands, out of her womb, out of her reach, and telling them that you no longer have a family. You no longer have a mother. You no longer have that cord. This is why this is a revolution of consciousness, because we are waking up to that. In waking up to that, we have the responsibility to speak to our mother, to respond to our mother's calling in her language. I give thanks to my mother being as determined as she was for me to speak the English language in a way that allows me to walk into whatever room I walk into and command the attention that I command, to show them that this is not my language, but I will beat you at it. This is not my language. This is your language. You came and you imposed it at me, and I will use it against you. I will use it against you because I will rip out every single lie you have said about my people in your language, so that your people understand that this is the power of my people, that I don't need to speak my language to speak my truth. I will use your language to speak your truth and mine through it by ripping yours to shreds.
Oof. Oof. Viva the revolution. Like I think I have chills, and I mean, I'm sure everybody listening to this is just like, so where do we where can we all meet and just like get this going? Like whatever this movement is, let's do it now. Like I feel like you just invigorated everyone listening. But I just want to give the other guys a chance, because we need to. I'm watching the time. We have to get over to Tsone. She'll be closing us off. But I want to give, I think Pule and Msakha wanted to add something on the note of thank you. So go for it, guys.
Okay, so it's interesting how you say, in your language you wouldn't have the word thank you, but you thank through works. Remember earlier I'd say that, language also tells you a lot about priority system of a group of people. In our context, in Southern Africa at least, the concept of thank you is also embedded in our names, what English would call a surname. So in my language, if I ask you what's your surname, I'm actually asking you, how do I thank you? Directly translated, surname is Sibong, which means to thank. So when you call me by my surname, you're actually thanking me. So it would be interesting to observe that for you to say my surname, you actually have to thank me, but also you saying out my surname is a way of recognition, because our surnames are not usually that one-liner, Msakha Mona. It's Mona, and then there's a paragraph. So actually for you to say my surname freely, you need to call me out, meaning you need to affirm my existence, right? All of that is embedded in the way in which you speak to me. However, if you choose a language other than the one I grew up with, you then obviously miss the opportunity to appreciate me, and vice versa, right? So again, the language you speak, you assume a position in the world. So there are certain things that you won't be able to do. If my love language is words of affirmation and you do it in English, you won't be able to affirm and show your appreciation with regards to who I am, because you cannot say who Msakha is in a European language. Let me leave it to Pule, because I'm sure there's linguistic way of putting this thing. Amakia box, engineer code.
I think we were thinking alike there. but I can say that I don't think ubonga means to thank. I think it's translated as thank in isiZulu, but I think it means a better translation would be
Yes.
to praise, because in the Western context, giving and thanking is transactional. You do something, you receive a thanks. But for us, they say don't mention it. You say dis rien or something like that, dis nada or something like that. But for us, you must mention it. You must make a big show of mentioning it. You must say this person is the product of all of these things. That is what would happen in olden days. You wouldn't just end it while saying I think. You would literally do the act of praising the person in their whole background context. And to me, these days, I think in those terms. I don't want to thank people. I want to praise them, which means I have to know something about their heritage. And that is expressed in this statement here, which is an idiom that's written here on the shirt, right? This is a phrase written from top to bottom, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. That's a very famous general sub-Saharan African idiom, which means a person is a person through people, meaning that you do not have identity alone. You only derive your identity through relations with others, and not only those that are living, but those that are dead, and those that were never living even. And when we say that, what is a person? Let me show a screen to end what I'm saying here. Let me show this final slide in my presentation that I usually give.
I want to go to this presentation whenever you're giving it, just as a
Are
side note.
I'm going to slides so you can how interesting it is.
20 and have this presentation. Just tell me when you are available. I will arrange it.
That's
Yes.
great. I'm keen to do that. I do this presentation quite a lot. So I'm doing African Writing Systems presentation here. And I usually end with this statement, which is by the great writer Thomas Mofolo. Remember, we're talking about not quoting some just en français, oh no, en français on dit, no, we don't say that. We say ka Sesotho, ka Sesotho ka leleme, ka maino ya, or something to do with Thomas Mafolo. If we say Mafoko Thomas Mafolo, Moeti Bat Buchabele, which is a very famous novel called Traveler to the East. Can you see the screen here?
Yes.
Yes.
And it says, ke re motho e seng motho sebopeho le ho tseba ho bua fela, empa motho dipuong, motho diketsong, motho mekgweng yohle, motho sephiring le pontsheng, motho bohlokong le thabong, boiketlong le bothateng, tlaleng le naleng. It means, if I have to translate it in a poor terms in English, I'll have to say, yes, I say a person, not a person in their physical nature or their ability to speak, but a person in all facets. And that is a person in sickness and in health, all those kind of things. A person in bad times and hard times, a person in abundance and in scarcity. A person is something that you do, is something that you have to do and that is done to you. We usually say this statement is an idiomatic statement to say, unketsa motho or ungenza umuntu, undenza umuntu.
Yes.
In other words, you are not born as a person. You have to be made into a person through your relations with others. And that is that thing of ukubonga. So when we are thanking, we are not thanking, we are praising you for being interconnected and all your ancestral relations and your current relations, producing your great act that we give thanks for. So I give thanks for all of you here. Yes, thank you.
Whew. No, we give thanks for you too, my brother. Wow. Wow. Like I'm blown away. I am blown away. I'm trying to read the comment, but I'll get back to that. Wow. So I think for me, as we're wrapping up, like for me, the key takeout is to like because I actually wanted to. So one of the things I really wanted to speak about is this process of decolonization, but it's sort of been like a running thread throughout the entire conversation, which is exactly the way I wanted it to. I didn't want it to be like a direct discussion. But one thing that's coming out for me is that the process, like at the heart of this process that we're calling decolonization, is to go back to our roots, is to go back to our heritage, is to go back to our culture, to go back to our languages, and have that be our core. You know what I mean? Like to go way, way, way back in order to understand ourselves to the core. That for me is something that has sort of run through the entire discussion today as a theme. And I want to thank you guys. Sure, like I am. This for me has been a very spiritual experience, I must say. Was there a comment? I'm sorry, I'm just seeing a comment from Msakha. Was there a comment from Manati? Msakha, did we miss a comment or a question?
We have quite a few comments, and I would like us to take some time to respond. And I know you have a video to play, but it's starting on a different stream. So even if we go a little longer, we can still play it. We will have actually an hour going for
Okay, perfect.
for the next panel. And I just want to plug here, if anyone here from this esteemed uh, family who is sitting with us would like to join the conversation, we have our global Black Lives Movement, making sense of nonsense, making sense of all the nonsense. If you would like to plug into that conversation, please come through. We do have a few comments here I would like us to run through, because again, it's about
yes,
making
please, yes, yes,
uh,
please, yes, please. We've got time.
we have, surely if you speak many languages, then you have many identities and you can move between these identities with ease.
Can I take this one? Can I start? Okay, okay, good. All right. So actually, could you put it on display again so I can look at it at the same time? All right, thank you very much. So surely you speak. I don't think we can ever move beyond who we are. I think we are who you are. Like like I quoted I referred to a Jamaican proverb earlier, puss and dog no have the same luck. A cat is always a cat, a dog is always a dog, an African is always an African. I think the languages we speak to are reflective of one, who we are culturally, but two, on another level, the social environment we're working in. So for example, why are we, having conversations in European languages? Why? Because we're navigating certain particular conditions, not because those are our languages or our identity. Like I speak English, but I am not a British person. I don't resemble, those people in England. I don't, right? It doesn't take much to figure that out, right? Just like I confessed with German, I'm too African to really get into the heart, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not for me, right? But without that colonial context, I would have never entertained German. I probably would have went to Yoruba or Tree if I could, or Kizulu if I could, right? it's just a certain environment that we're navigating in. We have to be cognizant of that. But in terms of our identity, we are who our ancestors are. That's why I'm a Jamaican and I'm an African, because that's who my ancestors are. Even if I was born in a country that is non-African, that wouldn't stop me from being African, right? It's absurd. And I think what happens is we get, I think, sometimes confused, because I think we're in this postmodern era where identities are liberal, everyone can be whatever they want, but no. You can't be separate from your ancestors. It's impossible. That's why, for example, I could be talking about the African people of Kemet. We know your century is ancient Egypt. I could be talking about African people in South Africa and Botswana. I could be talking about African people in Ghana, African people in New Orleans, Louisiana, African people in Jamaica, African people in Haiti. We're still going to have the same range of hair textures. We're still going to know the significance and power of locks, right? For example, or of braided hair, or what some might call Bantu knots, what in my language we'll call China bumps, right? There's certain things that are just clear because there's an essence to us as African people. And I think language bores this out. And I think the more African people we have actively, those of us who are, in the position to do so, mobilize together and work with other African people so that we can understand each other on our own terms, rather than through the colonizer's perspective, because I think that's really the core problem. Because what Dima said about breaking these boundaries, these colonially imposed boundaries and reinforced boundaries, we understand ourselves as African people, we can oversee those boundaries and organize and mobilize to break them down, the systematic aspects of them. So to answer your question, there's no multiple identities. There's only one. There's only really two. Your ethnic one, and then the larger cultural group from which that ethnicity comes from.
Not Tristan. I think Msakha also wants to add, and he's smiling. So I think he's very excited about what he has to say.
It is, because I was wondering when in this panel are we going to differ in opinions?
Yes.
So thank you, Tristan, for pushing us to that direction. It's healthy. So I my take is that all identities, especially human identities in this regard, all identities are a social construct. The very idea of identifying a person, because there needs to be certain things about which we have consensus that this is how and what we will use to identify. So you could identify as a group of people wearing hats, or as you belong to that group with locks, or you belong to that group of a certain skin color. But it's usually consensus amongst human being on, we'll use this marker, even if it's a physical thing, it gets taken and translated socially, and that becomes an identity. So that would lead me to think then that identity surely cannot be fixed if it depends on other people. So Upula, I think, said, Uguti, in locally we say umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, meaning a person is a person through other people. So if a person is a person through other people, what happens when other people change their mind about what makes you human? For example, other people, let's say in South Africa, can say you are human enough for them in their context if ungumZulu, you are Zulu, or if you are Siswati, or if you are of a certain surname. If your surname is Mona, to me, you are closer to me than someone whose surname is Dlamini, right? But again, that's a social setup that we're going to use surname as a way of identifying. Now, to the question of multiple identities, I think if to speak a language is to assume an identity, then the more languages you speak, the more key you have to other identities, because language helps you actually express an identity that could be usually cultural, So when you are Zulu, you don't usually just speak the language. There are certain things that accompany or that are in the background of the language that you speak. So if you are Zulu, you would see the world in a particular way. You see people in a particular way. For example, how we relate Zulu in terms of, I don't know what you call it, ubhlobo. There's mama, which is mother, baba, which is father, baba umncane, malume, cousin. So already there's a particular way of relating to people that's governed by the language that I speak. In other languages, they probably don't have ubaba umncane, which is small father, loosely translated. They will just call him uncle, right? But in my context, uncle is actually brother of my mother, right? But if I now switch and speak English, that identity of an uncle gets altered in a way. An uncle cannot just be brother of my mother. Brother of my father also becomes uncle through the language that I chose to identify him. So I think then, because identity is socially constructed, it will shift, it will be altered, it will be modified. I mean, there's no way you can fix. I don't think there's a way you can fix identity unless you want to be biological about it. But I mean, that would be a topic for another day. But if we sort of agree that the very idea of speaking was one day invented, a certain group of people agree that this is how we're going to communicate. And over the years, you've seen how languages develop, more sounds, more details get added into the languages. While the opposite is true for other languages that are dying out. So certain sounds, we're losing certain sounds, we're losing certain ways of writing, right? But in the background, that also means we are also losing certain aspects of that cultural group that would speak that particular language. But if, for example, there's a language in South Africa called Kolobedu, please correct me if I'm not saying it right, someone. Kolobedu, ne?
Kilobedu.
Kilobedu. So on the surface, you might think that's Sesotho or Sepedi, but it's not. What happened is that language was excluded from the official languages, that group of people. They didn't make it as a language. But the people still exist in South Africa. If they exist, that means they now assume another identity, whether by choice or by circumstance, a different topic. But because those people exist, but officially that language group does not exist, if identity is fixed, the question becomes, those people who used to be Balobedu, who speak Kolobedu, what are they or who are they now? Thanks.
Wow. Sorry, Adima, is there more? Because I don't want to speak too much. I want to actually get to what the community, what the family has to say on the socials.
There are more comments. Yeah, we have more comments. I do want to say back again to this, very, and I do recommend that you come through and let's have a panel about this alone, languages and identity, because that's a whole other, which we have room for. We do. And if you're in South Africa, that means the time zones will allow for you to have that discussion at a decent time for you. It'll be stupid o'clock for me, but I will wake up for it and I will set this panel. If you are available and if you are up for it, because this is a conversation that urges that, because if we're talking that the 3 pillars of our reunion is research, rediscover, and reclaim. And these 3 coming together are very central to do it through our languages. I just want to make one comment about ease, that ease is it's a matter of perspective, right? How do you mean by ease? Flowing between them with ease, because okay, I can be speaking the Arabic language, I can be speaking the English language, I can be speaking the French language with ease, as in without difficulties in the pronunciation. But in the back of my head now, and this is something that is getting more and more as I get in this movement here, I am reminded that as much as I'm able to speak this language, I cannot speak my own. And so along with this ease comes a bit of dis-ease, and we need to be able to balance that in our moving forward. And I leave that there and really ask you to consider this panel, even if it's a 1-hour follow-up discussion. Malele, I don't know what you've started, but I just need.
No. I just want to make a point about what you're saying, Dima, about the dis-ease, because I think the other day I was telling you that I'm working on my next project now, my next poetry project, and in that one I actually want to include a lot more, poetry in my mother tongue, because my first album was like just predominantly was actually only English, and so my next album I'm actually making an effort, like it's my intention actually. I'm very deliberate about that, because I felt dis-ease actually, putting this album out, and so many people were like, dude, it's great, it's amazing, blah blah blah, but are you releasing anything, or do you have anything in Sesotho, in Pedi, in Tswana? Do you have anything in our languages? And I felt so I can relate so much to the dis-ease, because when it came up, I felt actually very uncomfortable about the matter. So I fully agree with you about the dis-ease in terms of moving between those identities that are created by the language that you choose to take a position in society with.
I want to go back. Can someone pronounce the name for me? Is it Unati?
Yes.
Unati Nopete is a very fine linguist, and it would be good to follow up with her being a panelist as well. That's a good person to have on the panel to explain this concept herself, because I'm sure she have very enlightening things to say about it.
Unati, we're inviting you.
Yeah, if
okay,
you're here, I am dropping the link. If I have permission from the hostess, we don't have too long because we do have to play that the thing. But if you're happy with this, I can drop the link, or you can forward it to her.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead. If she wants to join in, she can definitely.
Okay.
If she, yeah.
Okay. I am dropping the links in the comment. We will be letting Unati through. I just want to say, in my language, in Nubian, that means moon. And the reason I made a comment about ease and identities is I have a Nubian brother, Rami Dawood, who made his first song. He's a rapper, musician, and an actor, among many other things. And his first song that's in a bit of English and a bit of Nubian, and it's called Sahara Unati, the desert moon. And in the bit that he is speaking in Nubian, he's actually translating Malcolm X's words into Nubian, saying, "Who are you? Who gave you this name? Do you know who you are?" I'll find the link now and I'll drop it here because it was a very strong one, and reading your name and reading your comment reminded me of that song. So I will post it here. I hope you will click on that link and join us and share your perspective. And then we saw someone will have to go back and watch this again. You are not alone.
Yes.
Tuibo, yes, unlearn the lies, relearn the truth, remember ourselves. Que viva la revolución. Yes, Joey Zaza, yes.
Joey Zaza.
Again, the revolution. We meet right here. Right here, right here.
Right here, Imani. The revolution will be televised, remember.
We are the revolution. Remember that every day, every morning, that sun rises and you are blessed with opening your eyes and finding yourself on this earth that you chose to come here to. You look yourself in the mirror and you remind yourself and say, we are Africa rising, and own what that means. Own it. Because believe you me, no one is going to be telling our truth but us. No BBC, no CNN. I've gone through that. Personally, I stood outside CNN building here in Washington, D.C. and asked them in March, come down and let me tell you why the women of Sudan are dressed in white and why we are leading this revolution. Not a peep. It wasn't until I went and I parked myself outside the embassy and I sat from April until August. I went home to shower and change and recharge my phone, and I went back to the embassy. Then CNN was like, can we talk? I was like, no. So it is up to us. It is us. And if we're doing it, we better do it in our language, because you know what? We're doing it for our people. They tell their news for their people. They can be Africa, but they're telling their people about Africa. So they're telling their version of Africa.
Yeah, they get to frame the narrative.
Like there was this article that's saying the pandemic hasn't hit Africa as much as expected. And scientists don't have an explanation why. What the heck kind of title is that? What explanation are you looking for? Are you looking for us to be swallowed? Joey Zaza says, Puerto Rico's first African heritage, I believe, comes from Dinka, Mandinka, and Mozambique. How much of those languages played a part in creating Spanish on the island, which differs from other Spanish just a bit? And can we please hear something in those tongues? Anyone?
I don't know if Pula wants to add.
He's coming with a smile.
Well, you know,
I think
I showed you earlier.
Oh, could you post?
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was wondering if the comment, because I wanted to read it a bit more. Sorry. Continue, Pula. Sorry, I didn't.
Mandinka is one of in the group of Mande languages, and the writing system that I was showing you that my name is written in is usually used for writing languages like Mandinka, and there's a dictionary online where you can find it's an English Mandinka dictionary written in the script of Nko. So it's a very good resource there. And even if you, sir, Mr. Joey Zaza, if you go and check that dictionary, I'm sure you're going to find some words there that you can recognize from Puerto Rico. So that's an important thing. And for example, one nice thing that I remember from being in Mali is if you greet someone in the evening, you say Anisu, which means you and the evening. That is a nice way of greeting. It's a nice idiomatic way of greeting in that context. Anisu, you and the evening. And then in Mozambique, we've got language like, for example, Msakha was talking about Xitsonga. That one is there. And remember, it's possible that Xitsonga traveled all the way to Japan in olden times, because remember there was a samurai from the area of Mozambique who ended up becoming a very famous samurai in Japan. So it's possible that the diaspora even went to Japan, you understand? In terms of the language, you might find there was some linguistic influence in a particular context there. And then, of course, we have many languages in Mozambique, and not least being the Makua language, which is very important and that we don't speak of enough. And I have a very good scholar in our cultural history groups who is of the Tembe chieftaincy, and he the kingdom. It's a kingdom, Tembe kingdom. Excuse me. And he will always talk about Shizonga, Shizonga, Shizonga. And this is not an official language, but it's very important. Shizo, with the sound Zhonga. And the history of that is very illuminating for South Africans. If we now look at Tembe history and understand that, that will be very illuminating for us. And it's something that we need to consider, which we don't consider because of the language and border divide between Anglophone South Africa and Lusophone, where it's Portuguese in Mozambique. And we have to make that divide. So having Portuguese is very helpful to make that divide. We shouldn't underestimate the use of these languages to cross the divide as well. But the most important thing is to get Xitsonga, because we have access to that and we can cross the border with that. Let me say that.
As I read the comments, show of hands, how many people want this follow-up panel on linguists before this reunion ends? Because we have 2 more days, and I will hold him hostage here and Unati as well until we pin a date before the end of this week. Show us, write in the comments something if you demand
a part 2.
We demand a part 2. Encore.
A part 2.
Imani said, wow, many thanks. Thank you, Imani. We have yo with a lot of sun. Yes, bring it.
Oh.
There
layers and layers. We need to retrieve ourselves from the cemetery of colonialism. Snaps. Amen, sister.
Yep.
Okay, tag your people, tag your friends. We're not the only ones having this conversation. You know, in your circles, there are at least 3 other people having this conversation. Tag them. Yes, I said 3. You will find them. They will come to mind. Tag them. We have, I think, Msakha, there is a bit of a misunderstanding with regards to surnames. In my understanding, they were forced to people from a European context. Even Jews started using surnames around the 1700s. I don't know. I know in Nubia, we are called by our mother's name. So I am Dima Nadia.
Yeah, Msakha, you got anything to add there? In a response, I think it's I agree. You were encouraging debate amongst the panelists, so even the community is encouraging debate and opposing opinions.
Yes, thanks, Prabuntu. I don't even think it's a misunderstanding. I think these things were done deliberately. Hence, I did make a comment earlier that the concept of a surname forces you to have a one-liner of who you are after your first name. And I want to emphasize that that's, in terms of us as Africans, that's not enough. But for administrative purposes, you need it, and you still do need to have a piece of paper that you can carry with you. So I won't go into detail about how it started in terms of colonialism, but there is a system within which, if we were to fit in, we do need to shed pieces of who we are. And this is where this issue comes in, that if you are to identify yourself in terms of the administrative system within which you all operate, I'm an ID, student card, I'm a passport, then your Stagazelo, or rather your clan name, cannot fit in there. So we've sort of reduced that into one liner, Msakha Mona. Does it make sense?
Can I add some? I want to add some to what Msakha was saying. This is part of why I say when we're talking about colonialism, and it's because I still think it exists, or else we wouldn't be speaking in the languages we're speaking. That's how you know it's still a problem, right? That's why I say, because one of the things I think that colonialism does, it makes African people suppress our Africanness in a holistic sense, whether you're talking language, whether you're talking about how you organize your concept of family, how you deal with economics. Why are we always talking about capitalism or Marxism when both are European ideas? Not that they're not good in their own respective contexts, but why do we even consider them relevant as African people? Just in an intellectual space, just for example, I'm just throwing an example. I don't want to get into that conversation too much, but that suppression factor, because colonialism isn't necessarily destroying culture, but it's suppressing it. That's why Msakha has to, with the surnames, you have to apply it to a specific modality, right? To first name, last name, even though that's not all the names that you may have, in a society. So that clearly tells you the very administrative system has a cultural orientation. But this is how Eurocentrism always gets us, is that it portrays itself as universal when it's simply one mode of being. Like I remember, to Msakha's point, I was watching a video. There's a former NBA player of the Congo, Dikembe Mutombo, and he has a video on YouTube where he talks about this when he was drafted. He has several names, but he had to choose a specific arrangement because why? You're dealing with a Eurocentric society, and it just sparked that conversation. I thought that was very important and prudent because that's how they suppress you culturally, because everything is cultural, right? The language we choose to speak, everything is cultural. I think it's just hard for us because even certain things we may be attached to are a result of the colonial condition that we're navigating, right? We may not want to hear it all the time, but that's just this is what it is. Like I said, I was talking about my wardrobe earlier. I need to stop wearing certain things. I need to de-Europeanize my wardrobe. That doesn't mean a European person has to de-Europeanize their wardrobe, or an Asian person. Myself as an African person, I need to do those things. Like wardrobe is one thing. I'm not saying it's the entirety or the end all be all. I'm just using it as a specific example. So yeah, so that naming issue is a result of suppression. I think about it in a diasporic context. Sometimes African people in the diaspora, we will pick names that don't sound as ghetto, right? Because we think it's going to get us a job, even though unemployment rates haven't changed. Even though no matter how many European names we use, it doesn't change. Like I've seen in personal conversation where the African person will pick a European name that not even the European person will pick for themselves. I've seen that in conversations, even when I show the actual statistical evidence that names don't actually affect the job market. It's just simply whether a corporation is racist or not and how they choose to practice racism. We don't even want to believe it. And I think part of why that false posture of disbelief, I think what's at the root of it is that we don't see them as good names. We look down on them. So that's why we don't want to do it, right? And that comes from this idea that European names are good, and anything that's too far out from the European name is negative. Because I remember, I don't want to get too personal with it and call people, but that's just where I would say that's part of culture suppression. Because remember, we're still African people in our disposition, but suppression is pushing you down from doing something that's like, oh, I got this dreadlock. Oh no, cut your hair, right? Because this is a big issue in many parts of the African world, right? Or we can even go to skin bleaching, or we could even go into the kind of institutions we choose to create or choose to be a part of. That whole thing is part of cultural suppression. And I think it's important to remember everything is cultural. Everything is cultural. There's nothing that is neutral. Everything has a cultural context, whether we want to hear it or not.
I think that really does go back to
Pule, you had something? I think Pule had something that he wanted to share. I don't know.
Let you know.
Oh, okay.
She's got
no,
something.
it's okay. I was just reiterating something about family and the truth. Thank you. But again, it goes back. We look down upon it. We look down upon our names. Well, again, it goes back to this self-inflicted state of mental slavery, because we've bought into the conditioning that we have been disassociated from one another in the process of uprooting us from Mother Africa, from our land, from the rest of our family. Began the conditioning in that we are different. We are different, so we have been traumatized into survival mode. And if we're traumatized into survival mode, then we have to find what is wrong with the other to convince ourselves that we are stronger and that we will be the ones who can survive whatever we are going through. This is the mother of all psychological warfares that we are going through. And the second we start recognizing it as such, then it ceases to be the cyclone that it is, that it keeps sucking us back in. We are looking down upon each other because we don't know about one another, and we have believed what the mainstream is telling us the other is. So being on the continent, we have what mainstream media is telling us about the diaspora: thugs, drug dealers, and whatever, gangsters, whatever, however you want to frame it. This is the image that we are perceiving on the continent, and in the diaspora receiving of the continent, the news is, oh, look, they're just running around trying to go to Africa, run around in the jungles, or run around in the desert, or run around in this. Why would I go to, I can't handle the heat in Africa. Well, there's no air conditioning, there's no internet, there's no this. I don't want to be around barefoot with naked people. You have that, but that's what mainstream has been feeding into our minds, into our head, which goes back to why we need ownership of our truth. We need to be able to tell our truth for our people. I need to stop caring when people tell me you're too soft on the Europeans, you're too forgiving of the Europeans, you're too harsh on the Africa. I don't give two. This is a family affair, so I won't say that word just in case the youngin are watching. But I don't care about what the Europeans think. I don't care what the Europeans perceive. I don't expect anything from them. I don't expect them to free me. I expect my people to free me. I expect my people to show up for me. So I speak for them. I speak to them. I speak with them. I work with them. The reason we look down, or we misunderstand, or it's ignorance. It is our ignorance, which is why we have this platform. It's why I start this day, from at least from our side here on the East Coast, with a program that says what's right with Africa. We need to rewrite this narrative. We cannot keep believing that all that comes from Mother Africa is diseased, is lacking, is non-functional, is missing something. We have all kinds of greatness. Malele was on that panel, the Black Love Stories, and Fusion was floored. Fusion was just like, I asked you 3 weeks ago to come up with these recommendations, and I was like, and I swear to you, I didn't have time to actually scratch my bum to come up with these recommendations. I came up with them 4 days ago. 4 days ago, I contacted these people. So in 4 days, I was able to give him just a glimpse of what our people can produce. Please, please, please make time and go to our page on Facebook and watch the session that is Black Love Stories, hosted by Elaine Fusion, and watch what is coming out of our continent. We stopped by Kenya, we stopped in Ghana, we stopped in Rwanda, in South Africa, and in Sudan. Watch what is coming out of our people from our center, and understand that we have nothing to be ashamed of. We just need to know one another. We need to dedicate time. Dedicate 1 hour in your day. Half is Black then, half is Black now. In the half hour that is Black then, find out something that happened to our ancestors, whether on the continent or in the diaspora. Learn. In that Black now, find out something that is positive and coming out of your people right now, because they will have you believe that nothing is coming out of you but looting, but war, but complaints, but victimization. And really, nothing about this platform here says any of these things, except we are proud people. We are here to show that we are here. We are here to tell our family we are here, and it's all love, and nothing and none of the attempts these systems have done are working, because we recognize the greatness within.
We are Africa rising. We are rising. We are rising. We are rising now. Sorry, Pule.
Lima has taken us very far with the inspirational rhetoric, so I'll be taking us back. I think it was a nice point about the surname, so I would like to just go back into technicality, if you don't mind. I'll just like to start by saying, yesterday in South Africa, as we know, it was what is so-called Heritage Day, and this is the 24th of September, and this is a bit of a charade in South African terms, where people essentially are role-playing their own heritage in a big way, really, because we are so conditioned by the categories that have been passed through the apartheid state, that we haven't questioned them and interrogated the finer details of our heritage to see where these things are enforced from above and where they come actually from people. And what often happens is that we also assume things in olden days were operating with the same systems that we have today. In other words, we use a lot of anachronisms. We assume that there was a concept of like continent of Africa in olden days. So there's no evidence of that. They assume that there was something like a concept of a black person in olden days. There was no thing like that. For example, if you would say umuntu omnyama, which means literally a black person, in olden days that meant a person who is performing witchcraft. That was this thing. This is a product of the modern political structure and systemic structure. But this is not the point. The point is this: yesterday was actually Shaka Day. And what is Shaka Day? It is the day that Ilembe, which is Shaka Gasenza died. And that was the original celebration on this day. Now we've made it into Heritage Day. We have to have a braai and do your culture. It's sort of like a role play in the way that it's performed. But Shaka Gasenza is often called in the world Shaka Zulu. But there's no person called Shaka Zulu. No person like that ever existed, Shaka Zulu. We're assuming that there's a name and a surname. Surnames were not existing in those days. There was nothing like a surname. If I say to myself, my name is Pule Welch, I'm saying a name and surname according to government. But if I say myself in African terms, I'm Pule ga Jano Lynch, meaning I'm Pule of Jano Lynch, who is my ancestor. And Shaka is Shaka ga Senzangakona, who is his father, Senzangakona. If I say the current monarch of the Zulu kingdom, which we call Isilo, which means a big cat, is Zwelithini Gabhegu Zulu. You see, so we're saying the father's name, it's a patronym. Now, the thing that happened with surnames is that because for official purposes, you had to write down something. They would say, what's your surname? And in Afrikaans, they would say, wat is your van? In other words, van means from, like van der Westhuizen means from the West House in German. Yeah, van der Westhuizen or van Skalwijk, etc. There's a van there, always a van. So what is your van? And that actually is a word in Xhosa today, Ifani, or in a lot of things, Ifani. Ifani has nothing to do with your identity. Ifani is just a government name that was given at some point in history. And it was given because it was your father or grandfather's name. They would say, what is your fan? What is your, and they would say, and then you would say your father's name. And your father might have been like Jordan. That might have been his name. He might have had an English name, Jordan, as a first name. And then you end up having a surname, which is Jordan, which a very famous writer in South Africa who wrote the most famous Xhosa novel, which is called Ingqumbu Yaminyanya, and that is A.C. Jordan. And he actually is Zengele and Gelengele in heritage. That now we would say he's Isidugo. And Isidugo is now actually your identity in terms of your heritage. The surname is not important. The surname is just a government thing. You understand? It's something that was passed down to the state. So it can be anything, really. It's just a matter of the logistics of the state. So we assume that surnames have always been there. They haven't always been there. It's a new thing. It's a contemporary thing. All over in the world. Macintosh. You know, the Mac means the son of. Bin Laden. The bin means the son of. You know, these things are in every culture in the world. There was no surname. This thing is something that's about the nation-state concept. We have officialdom and bureaucrats that have to put down something. So I'd like to say that about surname.
Wow, I'm never going to look at my surname the same again. Like ever. I might actually go and like hunt, like do some research actually on that last name. Wow. No, man, you guys have given us a lot. Dima, how are we doing for time over there? Do we still have more comments?
To wrap up, because I do want to play this video, and I am
yes. And I think the comments keep coming. Like the more we try to wrap up, the more we open more topics.
Imani is saying lock him in. Yeah, I'm saying Ule, you're not. Sandra. Okay, and I dropped the link here. Please do check it out. Beto's our soul brother, an oasis of knowledge from Puerto Rico.
Beto.
Returning family member, one perfect love family. Sorry that I've not been able to be with you all this week. My soul is with you, though. Ashteo, you are with us. You are with us, brother. Joey Zaza says, "There's a Jibaro. There is nothing wrong with being barefoot in the mountains and feel nature through our feet, roots through our roots. Nature unifies us all." Yes. Hey, Baro. You knew I would ask. Now you know you're a returning family member, because this is something that sticks with me. Yes. We have nothing to be ashamed of. Joey Zaza's applauding. for me, they're showing clear these comments. Is anyone reading anything there? Or is Facebook not recognizing the language? Is anyone seeing a comment there?
I'm not seeing. Is Facebook censoring us? I don't know. I'm also not seeing anything.
Oh, I'm sure
Did we break Facebook? Perhaps we broke Facebook.
we can appreciate each other's languages, and the
I kept having them
would go away.
and I think you have copies of the letter that I sent.
Oh, Tristan, can you mute? Who's speaking? There we go.
Not reading. Nope. Okay, so it's not just us, and it is actually Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Well, sorry we couldn't read the comments. I thought it was just my machine, but it would seem that it is not. We will take your demands to Pule, and Unati hopefully will join us to have a part 2. Msakha, Tristan, and Mo Malele, I will hold them here after the ending credits and see their dates and their availabilities. And if all goes well, check the calendar. It will be it will be updated at 2 in the morning our time, and maybe with the blessings of the ancestors, we will be able to put them in for another session, maybe in the morning tomorrow or after. So stay tuned, and I yield to Mo Malele to close us out before we put the video.
Oh yes, so we're closing off with a performance from Zones, which really it's just so full, just to get us into the mood for the weekend, to just bring us together, and just close off this session in terms of our languages and the power of language, and getting back to our heritage, getting back to our roots. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank each and every one of you guys, just Dima, Bule, Tristan, Msakha, for availing your time and availing your knowledge, availing your heart, your spirit, your soul. You guys have, each and every one of you guys have bared yourself on this virtual stage today here. I've learned so much. I actually feel like when this is done, thank God for technology, because then we can now go back to these things and like rewatch them and listen to them, because I've learned so much. And I think I speak for everybody who's tuned in today, that we've also learned, that everybody has learned so much. Even if you came in as an expert, there's things that you took away from this session. So I want to thank all of you guys for your time. And I want to thank everybody at home from around the world, around the country, who have tuned in, people who have stayed up, or people who have woken up, people who just came back from work, wherever you have been joining us from today. Thank you very much. And we're hoping to do a part 2. This has been an amazing session. I think we just scratched the surface. And I'm very happy. For me, to be honest with you guys, and I don't use this lightly, but for me, this was a very spiritual experience. And I'm a changed person, actually, coming out of this session today. So thank you very much to each and every one of you guys. And we shall be in touch. Like I say, we're not done. There's still a lot more that I think we need to delay and uncover. But yeah. But without further ado, the lovely Zones, you guys can follow her at evoking Zones on Instagram. She's a lovely Afro musician, Afro soul musician, a very, very, very soulful vocalist, and she's gonna be closing us off today, just to ease us all into the weekend. And thank you very much. Yes. I will do all of that stuff. Fantastic. Thank you guys. It's been good.
Sorry, since this is a panel about language, I must implore you, because I do it to all the boys, and I have to be consistent. Since this is a panel of language and the power of words, we must be more careful with our use of the term guys. There is a
yes
here.
You I was like, Dima, you and I have been on like our fair share of panels, and we've interacted, and I always see you going after the guys for the use of the term guys. So I suppose it's my turn. Now to feel the brunt and to correct my lingo. But you're right. No, you're right. And this is how we learn, hey?
Yeah.
This is how we learn. This is most certainly how we learn.
I had to learn the hard way. I saw my mother take her wooden slipper and throw it at my sister with the radar focus I've never seen before, just because my sister was saying bye guys and she walked out, and mom threw that slipper, brought her back basically and told her, we're not guys. We're not guys. We're not
All
guys.
right. My
Stuck.
apologies. My apologies.
Fine, we learn.
Pule, I'm gonna give you. Pule just wants to close off with something. I'm gonna give him 60 seconds to close off. He just has something that he wanted to say.
Yeah, I just want to, because I didn't highlight the Kwe languages of the west side of this country, such as Kwekwe Gobab, Ora Gobab, and languages like Muki and these kind of languages, and Khuntali. And so I have to say, to conclude in Kwekwe Gobab, I have to say, Khutse wi ida khauba sida goan anst umisa. I can say it again. Ada khauba sida goan anst umisa. Now that means help us to unite for our linguistic heritage. Thank you.
Oh shoot, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time once again. It's Samoa Night's Music and we're jamming. Ready to see those resources.
This is how we ask for rain from the creator of rain, the maker of rain. This is how we ask for blessings, for abundance, for the green of the land, for the peace, for the joy, for unity. The type of rain, the type of rain that does not flood, the type of rain that is enough. It's a prayer. What if there was nothing wrong with you? What if all that you are is an unfolding, a becoming, which am? You are whole, you are complete, you are adequate, you are full, fulfilled, profound. Your value cannot be measured, you're immeasurable. You're enough. You're enough. Kabul. Kaon lo todi ose pata pake ose pata pata. The color was told you're enough. Singa choka kani ini kuwa kuwe. Se chacha mon lo ima pake pa. You are enough. You're enough. There is nothing about you that needs to be added or minus. You're enough. You don't need to shrink or add anything. You're enough. You're enough. You're enough. You're You're enough. It's time to celebrate. I hope you enjoy it. It's one of the melodies. Immortal. I am immortal. That's one. They are like each other. They come from each other. That's why. Immortal. Hey. Come on.